Hello dear students, welcome to Vision Pharmacy. In our today's video, we are going to see the difference between solutions and suspensions, syrups and elixirs, as well as suspensions and emulsions. So before we start with our today's video, please do like, share, subscribe and press the bell icon for getting updates on upcoming videos. So let's begin, students. The first difference between solutions and suspensions. So, we can define solution as a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances, whereas a suspension is a heterogeneous mixture of substances. Then, particles are invisible to the naked eyes in case of solution, whereas particles are visible to the naked eyes in suspension. Dispersion of particles are even or uniform in solution, whereas dispersion of particle is not even in case of suspension. Particle size is less than 1 nanometer in case of solution, whereas particle size is more than 1000 nanometer in case of suspension. Then, solute and solvent are in the same phase of matter in solutions, whereas particles and the medium are in different phases of matter in case of suspension. Then, in solution, they do not, or the particles do not scatter the beam of light, whereas in suspensions, they scatter the beam of light, right? Then, particles do not settle on standing in case of solution, whereas particles do settle on standing in case of suspension. The another difference between solution and suspension is solutions are clear and unclouded, whereas suspensions are cloudy and opaque. Moving further differences. Then solutions are comparatively more stable, whereas suspensions are unstable. Then solutions are or they diffuse rapidly, whereas there is no diffusion in the suspensions. Then the next point to differentiate is the solution do not exhibit the Tyndall effect, whereas suspensions may or may not exhibit the Tyndall effect depending on type of mixture. The solution passes through the filter paper, whereas the suspension particle does not pass through filter paper, right? For example, sugar solution is an example of solution, whereas sand in water is an example of suspension. I hope you have understood the difference between solution and suspension. Now, moving further to next differentiation, that is difference between syrup and elixir. So let's begin. Here is the difference between the syrups and elixirs. Syrups are concentrated viscous and aqueous solutions, whereas the elixir is pleasantly flavored, sweetened hydroalcoholic liquids. Then, the syrup is an opaque, may not be clear solution, whereas elixirs is a clear solution generally. Then, the primary solvent in syrup are sugar as well as water, whereas the primary solvent in elixir are alcohol and water. Then the syrup has a thick consistency and the elixir has a thin consistency. Alcohol is not an essential ingredient in syrup, whereas alcohol is the essential ingredient in elixir. The syrup is sweeter than the elixir, and ultimately elixir is less sweeter than the syrup. Syrups have very higher viscosity, whereas elixirs have a lower viscosity. Syrup is less stable than the elixirs, and elixirs are more stable than syrup. Moving further, syrup has a high concentration of sugar, thus cannot be used by patient with diabetes, whereas elixir has a low concentration of sugar and can be used for patient with diabetes. Then the syrup masks the unpleasant taste and smell of the medicinal agent better than elixir, whereas elixirs mask the flavor of medicine agent less effectively, right? The next point to differentiate is the syrup can be difficult to formulate than elixirs, whereas elixirs can be easy to formulate than syrup. And last point, sorry it is not visible clearly, syrup may or may not use an alcohol for solubility purpose, whereas elixir must use alcohol for solubility. Then moving further to the next difference between suspensions and emulsions. So the difference between suspension and emulsions are as mentioned here. A suspension are dispersion of finely divided insoluble solid particles, that is dispersed phase, in a fluid, that is dispersion medium or continuous phase, whereas an emulsion is a mixture of two immiscible liquid, one of which is finely subdivided and uniformly distributed as droplet throughout the other, right? Then the solid particles are dispersed in any medium, that can be solid, gas or liquid, whereas in emulsions, an emulsion consists of dispersed phase and dispersion medium, and both are liquid. Then dispersed particles settle on standing in case of suspension, whereas dispersed particles do not settle on standing in case of emulsion. Then dispersed particle size is more than 1000 nanometer in case of suspension, whereas in case of emulsion, dispersed particle size is 1 to 1000 nanometer. Then particles are visible through the naked eyes in case of suspensions, whereas particles are not visible through naked eyes in case of emulsions. Then talking further, they can be separated by filtration in case of suspensions. However, emulsions cannot be separated by filtration. Looking further differences. So, suspending agents are required for stability in suspensions, whereas emulsifying agents are used for stabilizing the emulsions. Then, suspensions may or may not exhibit the Tyndall effect depending upon the type of mixture, whereas emulsions shows Tyndall effect. Then freezing should be avoided as it may result into aggregation in case of suspension, whereas freezing should be avoided as it will lead to cracking in case of emulsions. Example of suspension is sand in water, whereas example for emulsion is milk as well as vanishing cream. So that's all in this video. Thank you students for watching this video till end. Thank you.